After my daughter's death, I inherited $32 million. My ex-husband, who left 10 years ago, has returned and is demanding that I give him the entire inheritance, trying to manipulate me. But I won't give in so easily. I don't think there are words wide enough, deep enough, to carry the weight of a mother burying her child. The morning of the funeral, I rose before the sun, though I hadn't truly slept. My bed felt like a raft set adrift in an endless ocean of grief. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, my daughter, my beautiful girl, smiling at me the way she did when she was 10 years old, missing one front tooth and wearing freckles like a crown. But now she was gone. 36 years old and gone. The church was already heavy with the scent of lilies when I arrived. People say it's a sweet fragrance, but to me it always smells like endings. My hands trembled as I laid the small bouquet I had brought across the coffin, white roses, her favorite. I whispered a prayer, though it came out more like a gasp. Lord, keep her safe. She was always mine, but now she's yours. I felt eyes on me as I stood there. Friends, neighbors, people I hadn't seen in years, all dressed in dark clothes, all watching with the soft pity that cuts deeper than a knife. Some offered hugs. Others just nodded. But no one could reach the place inside me where the ache lived. Then as I turned from the coffin, I saw him. It was like a ghost had walked in from the past, wearing a pressed black suit and that same arrogant posture I remembered all too well. My ex-husband, the man who had walked out on me 10 years ago when my body was riddled with illness, when I needed him most. The man who said he couldn't bear the burden, that he deserved a life free of hospitals and worry. He left me with my pills, my pain, and a silence so loud it nearly swallowed me. And now, here he was, standing in the doorway of my daughter's funeral. I nearly dropped my prayer book. My knees weakened, but pride stiffened my spine. I would not collapse before him. He didn't come to me right away. No, he lingered at the back, nodding to acquaintances, shaking hands as though he belonged. As though he hadn't abandoned us both when we were most fragile. The sight of him set my grief ablaze with anger, but I swallowed it down. This was my daughter's day, not his. The service began. Hymns were sung, scriptures read. My throat burned as I tried to join in, but no sound came. When the pastor asked me to speak, I rose slowly, clutching the edges of the pulpit for strength. I told them about the child she had been, the way she once insisted on saving every stray kitten, the way she painted suns in the margins of her schoolbooks because she said there was never enough light. I told them about the woman she became, strong, determined, yet tender-hearted. My voice broke when I said, "She was my greatest gift, and now she is my greatest loss." The room blurred with tears, but I didn't let myself fall apart. Not there. Not in front of him. After the final hymn, when the congregation moved toward the doors, he finally made his way to me. His face wore a look of false sympathy, but his eyes, oh, I knew those eyes. Cold, calculating, already measuring what could be gained. He didn't even offer me a proper greeting. He leaned close, his breath sharp with cologne, and said in a low voice, "All of it should come to me. You know that, don't you? The inheritance. The funds. Everything she left behind. It's mine by right." For a moment I thought I had misheard. I stared at him, stunned, my heart pounding like a hammer in my chest. Here I was, burying my only child, and the man who had deserted us dared to speak of money. I whispered, "How dare you?" But he only shrugged, as if my grief was an inconvenience. She was my wife before she was anything else. You can't expect to hold on to all that. Not at your age. You wouldn't even know what to do with it. At my age. The words cut, though not in the way he expected. I straightened, lifted my chin, and let every ounce of steel left in my bones show. You forfeited every right the day you walked away. Don't you forget that. He sneered then, but before he could reply, another mourner stepped between us, offering me condolences. He had no choice but to step back, though I could feel his glare boring into me from across the room. I held my ground, but inside I was shaking. Not from fear, but from the bitter knowledge that this man, this stranger who had once shared my home, would not stop here. He had smelled the money, the inheritance my daughter had left me, and he would chase it like a wolf chases blood. Still, as I walked out of that churchyard, the coffin lowering into the ground behind me, I pressed my palm to my chest and whispered to her memory, "Don't worry, my darling. Whatever he tries, whatever storm comes, I will protect what you left me. I will guard it with my life. Because a mother's love does not end with death. It only sharpens." A week after the funeral, the summons came. A letter from the lawyer, neat and formal, inviting me to the reading of my daughter's will. My hands trembled as I opened it. Not because of the money, though I knew it was substantial. No, my fear was of the finality. This would be her last voice, her last words to us. The thought of hearing them, of knowing she had planned for a life I would have to live without her, nearly undid me. Still, I dressed carefully that morning. A navy skirt, my pearl brooch. Clothes don't armor the heart, but they help you hold your head a little higher. When I arrived at the law office, I was surprised by the size of the gathering. Aunts, cousins, even distant relatives I hadn't seen since her wedding day. And then sitting smugly in the corner was him, my ex-husband. He wore that same black suit, but his tie was looser now, his confidence shining through like a bad perfume. He didn't look grief-stricken. No, he looked expectant, as if the whole affair were just a formality before he claimed what he believed was his. The room smelled faintly of old leather and ink, the kind of scent that makes you feel small and out of place. We sat around a long polished table while the lawyer shuffled papers, his spectacles sliding down his nose. My palms sweated as I folded them in my lap, bracing myself for her words. The lawyer began with the usual courtesies. "We are gathered here to honor the final wishes of." His voice blurred for a moment, my heart thudding so loudly I could hardly hear. But when he cleared his throat and began to read, the room fell into a silence so sharp you could hear the clock tick on the wall. My estate, valued at $36 million, inclusive of funds, properties, and investments, shall be left entirely to my mother. The words rang in the air, clean and undeniable. For a moment I could not breathe. She had thought of me. She had left everything to me. Not a portion, not a fraction, everything. My throat closed. I blinked hard, swallowing back tears, my hand flying to my mouth. It was as though she had reached out from beyond the grave and placed her hand in mine, whispering, "Mama, I trust you. I know you will do right by me." The room shifted. Gasps, whispers, the scraping of chairs. I barely heard them, so stunned was I by the magnitude of it. But then came the sound I dreaded most, a growl of rage. "What?" His voice cracked like a whip. My ex-husband shot up from his chair, his face blotched red, his fists clenched on the table. "This is absurd. All of it. To her? Not one word about me." The lawyer calmly adjusted his glasses. "That is correct, sir. The deceased made her wishes very clear. Everything goes to her mother." He laughed then, a bitter, mocking laugh. "Her mother? She left me 10 years ago and you think she just cut me out? I was her husband. I deserve it more than anyone in this room." He turned on me then, his eyes burning. "This is your doing, isn't it? You poisoned her against me. You made her write me out." I stayed seated, my hands folded tight in my lap though they trembled. "No," I said softly but firmly. "She knew her own mind. She made her choice." The room held its breath. Relatives shifted uncomfortably, avoiding his gaze. No one dared to side with him, though I could see some struggling with the shock. He slammed his palm against the table so hard the glasses rattled. "I won't stand for this. She was mine first, and you've stolen what's rightfully mine." The lawyer, still unruffled, cleared his throat. Sir, I assure you there has been no mistake. I have the documents signed and notarized in proper legal form. Your wife made her wishes known. Unless you can produce evidence to the contrary, these terms are final. I expected him to storm out. Instead, he sat back down, shaking with fury, his jaw tight, eyes glittering with malice. He said nothing more, but I could feel his hatred like a cold draft crawling through the room. The will reading ended, papers signed, copies distributed. I left quietly, clutching my folder to my chest, my heart heavy but resolute. I didn't feel triumphant. How could I? My daughter was still gone. No amount of money could fill that empty chair at my table, that silence in my phone. But I also knew this was what she wanted. She had trusted me with her legacy, her fortune, her dreams. And I would honor that trust. As I stepped outside into the late afternoon sun, I caught sight of him across the street, pacing like a caged animal, pulling out his phone with quick, furious movements. My stomach sank. I knew then. This wasn't over. It began just 3 days after the will was read. I woke early, as I always do, made myself a small breakfast, toast and tea, though I hardly tasted either, and settled by the window to watch the neighborhood stir awake. But instead of the usual quiet, the phone buzzed, one call after another. Neighbors, church friends, even an old cousin from Ohio. All of them asking the same thing. Have you seen what he's saying online? I hadn't. When my granddaughter came by that afternoon with groceries, she pulled out her phone and showed me. And there it was, his face, my ex-husband's, filling the screen. He looked older than I remembered, lines dug deep into his forehead, but his voice carried that same self-assured bite. My wife, he began, his tone dripping with false sorrow, was taken from us too soon, and in her final months I was there. I cared for her, stood by her, even after she left me. But now her mother has stolen everything. $36 million taken right out from under me. I ask you, is that fair? Is that justice? I sat frozen, my breath shallow. He leaned into the camera then, lowering his voice to a wounded whisper. I loved her. I gave her the best years of my life. And now, while I grieve, I'm left with nothing. Not even recognition for the sacrifices I made. Tell me, friends, what kind of world lets a bitter old woman erase a husband's place at his wife's side? My granddaughter muted it quickly, her cheeks flushed with anger. Grandma, don't listen. He's lying through his teeth. People will see right through it. But people didn't. Not at first. By evening, his video had spread across every platform. Strangers I had never met were commenting, calling me selfish, greedy, ungrateful. Some said I had manipulated my daughter. Others said I had no right to the money at my age. A few even dared to suggest I was a thief, hoarding wealth that should have gone to the rightful husband. I tried not to read them, but curiosity is a cruel master. I sat at the kitchen table late into the night, my glasses slipping down my nose, scrolling through message after message until the words blurred together. Each one cut a little deeper. Each one made me feel smaller, lonelier, more betrayed. What hurt most wasn't his lies. It was how quickly strangers believed them. I thought back to when he left me 10 years ago. The sickness had worn me down to a shadow of myself. I couldn't work, couldn't even climb the stairs without resting. He said he was tired, said he couldn't bear to waste his best years nursing a dying wife. And just like that, he was gone. He never came back. Not a phone call. Not a letter. Nothing. And now, here he was, painting himself as the devoted caretaker, the grieving widower, rewriting history while the world applauded. One night I sat alone in the dark living room, my hands wrapped tight around a mug of cold tea. I whispered into the silence, "Why are you doing this? Haven't you taken enough?" But of course there was no answer. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ache of my own heart. Days passed and his posts grew bolder. Photos of him and my daughter, smiling at some long-ago family barbecue with captions like, "Even after she left, I was still her rock." Another video where he sighed dramatically saying, "She always wanted me to have peace. But her mother, she's keeping it all for herself. I don't want the money, I just want fairness." I nearly dropped the phone when I saw that line. I don't want the money. It was the most shameless lie of all. That man wanted nothing else. He wanted an easy life, free from work, free from care, living off what my daughter had built. And yet the comments poured in. "Stay strong, sir. We believe you. That greedy old woman can't get away with it." My hand shook so hard I had to set the phone down. I pressed my palms to my eyes and let the tears come then, hot and bitter. Not because I doubted myself, but because I feared the damage he could do. Lies spread faster than truth. And with every video, every post, I felt my daughter's legacy being twisted, dirted by his bitterness. One afternoon, as I sat folding laundry, I found myself speaking aloud, as though she were still with me. "Oh, my girl, I promised I would protect what you left me. I didn't know it would mean protecting it from him. I didn't know he'd come clawing back." The walls held my words, but they didn't comfort me. By the end of the week, reporters were calling. One even showed up at my door, notebook in hand, asking for my side of the story. I closed the door quietly in his face. I wasn't ready, not yet. But deep inside, a flame had started to burn. Weak at first, flickering in the draft of my grief. But with every lie he told, every stranger who mocked me, the flame grew stronger. I would not let him win. I didn't know how yet, but I knew this much. I would not stay silent forever. The house was too quiet in those days. Even the ticking clock in the hallway seemed louder, as though time itself wanted to remind me of its passing. After a week of watching his lies spread like wildfire, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the phone. My daughter's photo stood in its frame nearby, her smile frozen in sunlight. I touched the glass and whispered, "Help me, honey. Show me what to do." The answer came in the form of a memory, her voice so certain, so steady, telling me years ago, "Mama, when life gets messy, don't just sit in the ashes. Sweep up. Start again." So that morning I picked up the phone and called the one person I knew could help. My lawyer, Mr. Carmichael. He was a tall man, silver-haired, with the calm patience of someone who had spent his life wading through storms of other people's making. When I arrived at his office, I felt like a schoolgirl again, clutching my purse too tightly, heart hammering in my chest. He stood when I entered, shook my hand warmly and said, "I've been expecting your call, Mrs. Bennett." We sat across from each other, the afternoon sun slanting through the blinds, stripes of light and shadow painting the polished desk. He folded his hands and asked gently, "Tell me what's troubling you." So I did. I told him about the videos, the false posts, the strangers calling me greedy. I told him how every lie twisted the truth of my daughter's life, how it made her legacy look like a battlefield instead of the gift she had intended. My voice broke once or twice, but I held on, determined not to fall apart. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "This is defamation, plain and simple," he said. "He's painting lies as truth, and people are believing him. But here's the thing about lies, they don't stand long when you shine light on them. We'll handle this carefully." I swallowed hard. "Carefully how?" "We won't stoop to his level," he said firmly. "We'll respond with dignity, with facts. You'll tell your story not with anger but with grace. And we'll keep every receipt, every document, every photograph, every witness, to show the truth." The word grace settled over me like a blanket. It reminded me of church hymns, of my mother's advice, of my daughter's laugh. I nodded slowly. Yes, that's what she would have wanted. Not bitterness. Just truth. He smiled. "Then let's get to work." That evening back home, I went through box after box of old papers and photographs. Bank records, hospital forms, letters my daughter had written me over the years. Each one was a thread in the tapestry of her life, evidence of who she truly was, and who had truly been there for her. As I sifted through them, I found one letter folded carefully in an envelope. Her handwriting danced across the page, and as I read, tears blurred the words. "Mama, if anything ever happens to me, promise me you'll keep your head high. Don't let anyone twist the truth. I know you'll guard what I leave behind, because no one else will love it like you." Her voice came alive in my heart, steadying me. I pressed the letter to my chest and whispered, "I promise." The next day I returned to Mr. Carmichael's office with a stack of documents and photographs bound in twine. He looked them over with approving nods. "This will do," he said. "Now the world needs to hear from you directly." The thought terrified me. I was no speaker, no public figure. I was just a mother, a grandmother, an old woman with shaky hands. But he assured me, "The truth is strongest when it comes from the heart, and yours will be heard." I went home that night and stood in front of the mirror practicing. My voice wavered at first, my words clumsy. But then I pictured her. The way she used to smile at me when she needed courage. The way she'd squeeze my hand before walking into a doctor's office. Slowly my voice grew steadier, firmer. "I am not here to fight," I told my reflection. "I am here to tell the truth. To protect my daughter's memory. To honor her wishes." By the time I sat down that night, exhaustion weighed heavy on my bones. But beneath it was something else. A quiet strength I hadn't felt in years. When I prayed before bed, I didn't ask God to silence him anymore. Instead, I asked for the wisdom to speak the truth without hate. Because I knew this wasn't just about me. It was about her. It was about keeping her story pure, untarnished by the bitterness of a man who had walked away long before the grave ever claimed her. The fight ahead would not be easy, but for the first time since the funeral I felt ready. I was no longer just grieving. I was gathering strength. The morning I decided to speak, I woke before the birds. The house was still dark, the kind of quiet where even the floorboards hold their breath. I made myself a pot of coffee, poured it into my good china cup, because if I was going to do this, I wanted to feel steady, like I belonged in my own skin. And then I sat at the kitchen table with my lawyer's notes spread before me. "Tell your story, Mrs. Bennet," Mr. Carmichael had said. "Don't argue. Don't shout. Just tell it the way only a mother can." So I did. With the help of my granddaughter, who knew more about cameras and phones than I ever will, we set up a small tripod in the living room. She drew the curtains just enough to let the morning light fall across my shoulders. No makeup, no fancy clothes, just me in my plain blue cardigan, the one my daughter once said made my eyes look softer. I looked into the camera, my heart pounding like a drum, and I began. "My name is Margaret Bennet. I am here today not because I want attention, not because I want to argue, but because I want to tell you the truth about my daughter." I took a slow breath, steadying myself, then held up the first photograph. It was my daughter as a little girl, standing in front of our old farmhouse, a gap-toothed grin stretching across her face as she held a stray kitten. She was a bright light from the start. She loved animals, she loved people, and she worked harder than anyone I've ever known. She built her life with her own two hands, and she did it without help from the man now claiming to have cared for her. Then I showed a copy of the divorce papers, 10 years old, signed when he had walked away. "This is the truth," I said gently. "He left me when I was ill. He left her when she needed him. He was not there." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't spit venom. Instead, I let the papers and photographs speak. Her letters from the hospital, written in her neat handwriting. "Mama, thank you for sitting by my bed every night. I don't know what I'd do without you." The receipts for the treatments I had helped her manage. Photographs of us together. Her frail but smiling, my hand clasped around hers. I showed them all. And then I looked into the camera and said, when my daughter wrote her will, she chose to leave everything to me. Not because I asked, not because I pushed, but because she trusted me to honor her memory, to protect what she worked so hard for. That is the truth. And though it breaks my heart to have to speak of this in public, I cannot let her story be twisted by lies. By the time I finished, my voice was shaking. My granddaughter squeezed my hand. You did it, Grandma. You sounded just like her, calm, strong. We posted the video online that afternoon. I didn't know what to expect. Maybe silence, maybe ridicule. But the views climbed quickly, and soon the comments began to appear. Finally, her sighed. This feels real. You can see the love in her eyes. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a sliver of peace. Over the next few days I made more videos, each one gentle, factual, never cruel. One about the years after the divorce, showing letters and photos where my daughter wrote about rebuilding her life. Another about the inheritance itself, with copies of the legal documents that proved everything had been done properly. And one, perhaps the hardest, where I spoke directly about my ex-husband. I do not hate him, I said quietly. I wish him peace, though he has brought me none. But I will not let him claim a story that is not his. My daughter left him out of her will because he left himself out of her life. That is the truth. When I finished that one, I sat for a long time in silence, tears sliding down my cheeks. It wasn't easy to speak kindly of a man who had hurt me so deeply. But I knew anger would not serve me. The truth would. My lawyer reviewed each video before I posted it, making sure I was careful with my words, that I showed evidence, not just memories. You're doing beautifully, he told me. The dignity in your voice, people will see it. They'll feel it. And slowly they did. The comments grew kinder. Strangers began to write messages of support. Some even admitted they had believed his lies at first but now saw the truth. You remind me of my own mother, one woman wrote. Steady, patient, and brave. That night I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. I dreamed of my daughter standing in the sunlight, smiling at me the way she used to. When I woke, I whispered, I hope I'm doing right by you, sweetheart. The storm wasn't over. I knew that. He was still out there, still fuming, still plotting. But for the first time I felt I wasn't powerless. I had spoken, and my truth was louder than his lies. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, the light from the screen flickering against my glasses. My granddaughter leaned over my shoulder, reading with me. See, Grandma? People are starting to get it. And they were. For every lie he told, I answered with a quiet truth. For every angry rant, I offered a photograph, a letter, a document. I never shouted. I never mocked. I simply laid the truth down like stones across a river, one by one, steady and unshakable. And people began to cross. His followers, who once cheered him on, began to slip away. Some of them left angry, realizing they had been misled. Others left quietly, no longer willing to lend their ears to a man who spoke only of bitterness. His numbers dwindled day by day. My lawyer showed me charts and graphs, but I didn't need them. I could feel it in the way his voice grew shriller with each video, like a man shouting in an empty room. One afternoon, my neighbor Doris knocked on my door with a small plate of cookies. Margaret, she said softly, I just want you to know I've watched every word you've said. You've carried yourself with such grace. We're proud of you. I nearly wept right there on the porch. But even as the public began to turn, I felt the scars of what he had done. Nights were still hard. Sometimes, in the quiet hours when the house creaked and the refrigerator hummed, I'd remember the comments that had stung the most. The ones that called me a thief, a burden, a woman too old to matter. Words like that don't vanish overnight. They burrow deep. And yet, I reminded myself I was not fighting for my reputation alone. I was fighting for hers, my daughter's, for the life she built, for the wishes she entrusted to me. I thought often of her strength. When she was 12 years old, she fell off her bicycle and broke her arm. I remember sitting beside her in the hospital, tears streaking down my cheeks, while she smiled up at me through the pain and said, "Mama, it's all right. Bones heal." That was the kind of girl she was. Brave, unflinching, even in pain. And I thought, if she could face that, if she could face all the battles life threw at her, surely I could face this. So I kept speaking, kept showing the truth, even when my voice trembled. And the world noticed. Articles began to appear, first small then larger. Headlines that once parroted his claims now began to question them. "Widow's truth," one read. "Mother defends daughter's legacy." Some reporters even called to apologize for chasing his story too quickly. I didn't gloat. I simply said, "The truth has always been here. It just needed time to be heard." Meanwhile, his videos grew darker. Gone was the sorrowful tone of the grieving widower. Now he spat anger, calling me a liar, a manipulator. But the more he raged, the more people turned away. His bitterness showed through like cracks in glass. And one by one, his subscribers left him. I remember the day my granddaughter burst through the door, phone in hand, her face lit with excitement. "Grandma, look. He's lost almost everyone. Thousands have unfollowed him in just a week." I took the phone and looked at the numbers, but what I saw wasn't triumph. It was sorrow. Because here was a man who had once been my husband, who had once laughed in my kitchen, who had once held our little girl in his arms, and now he was unraveling before the eyes of the world. I didn't feel victory. I felt grief, though not for him exactly. Grief for what bitterness had made of him. Grief for the man he could have been. If only he had chosen love instead of anger, truth instead of lies. That night, as I stood at the sink washing dishes, I caught my reflection in the window. My face looked tired, lined with years of both joy and sorrow. But behind the tiredness was something else, strength. The kind of strength that comes only when you've walked through fire and kept going. The public was turning. The truth was winning. But I knew the battle wasn't finished. He wouldn't stop easily. Men like him rarely did. Still, I whispered as I dried the last dish and placed it in the cupboard. "We're getting there, sweetheart. We're clearing your name. Slowly, surely." The night outside was quiet, the stars steady and bright. For the first time in many weeks, I felt something close to peace. Because I knew whatever storm still lay ahead, I wasn't standing alone anymore. The letter came on a gray Monday morning, slipped through the mail slot with the sound of finality. I recognized the heavy paper and the embossed seal before I even opened it. He was suing me. Defamation, the letter said. His lawyer claimed my videos had ruined his reputation, livelihood, and emotional well-being. I sat at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands. For a long while I just stared at the words, the black ink sharp against the cream paper. My heart sank like a stone. After all his lies, after all his anger, now he was dragging me into court. I called Mr. Carmichael right away. His calm voice steadied me. "Let him file," he said. "We will meet him in court. You've told the truth. That's what we'll show. But still fear not at me. Courtrooms aren't places for grandmothers like me. I'd spent my life in kitchens, in gardens, in Sunday pews, not in front of judges in dark robes." The day came faster than I expected. I wore my best gray suit, the one I had saved from my working days, and pinned my pearl brooch to the collar for courage. My granddaughter came with me, her small hand holding mine as we walked up the courthouse steps. My knees shook, but I lifted my chin. Inside, the courtroom smelled faintly of polish and old wood. The benches creaked as people settled. And there he was, sitting with his lawyer at the opposite table. My ex-husband. His hair was thinner, his face more lined, but his expression was as smug as ever. When his eyes met mine, he smirked, as though certain he had already won. The judge entered, and the room stood, then sat again. The proceedings began. His lawyer spoke first, a man with a voice like polished steel. He painted a picture of my ex-husband as a devoted spouse, a grieving man torn apart by my supposed campaign of slander. Her videos, the lawyer said, pacing smoothly, were not mere opinions. They were calculated attacks, designed to destroy my client's good name and strip him of the support of his community. She has left him humiliated, friendless, and financially devastated. I could feel eyes on me, weighing me, judging me. My hands tightened in my lap, but I did not look down. Then came my turn. Mr. Carmichael rose, calm as ever, and gestured toward me. Your Honor, the truth is simple. My client spoke the truth. She provided documents, photographs, letters, all evidence to support her words. What my client's ex-husband calls defamation is merely reality. He has lied and she has corrected the record. Nothing more. When it was my turn to speak, my legs trembled as I walked to the witness stand. I placed my hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. The judge's eyes were kind, but my throat still felt dry. I began quietly. I didn't want to be here. I didn't want to speak on camera. I didn't want to argue with him. But I had to protect my daughter's memory. I told the story plainly, without theatrics. How he had left me when I was ill. How he had not been part of her life for 10 years. How she had chosen of her own will to leave her estate to me. I held up copies of her letters, her will, photographs of us together in the hospital. He says he cared for her, I said, my voice steady now. But here is her handwriting. Mama, thank you for never leaving me. If he had been there, why would she write that? There was a hush in the room. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, as though listening more closely. His lawyer tried to shake me, of course. He asked sharp questions, tried to twist my words. Isn't it true you benefited financially from these videos? He pressed. No, I answered firmly. I didn't earn a penny. I didn't ask for sympathy. I only asked for the truth to be heard. Isn't it possible, he continued, that you influenced your daughter's will? That she was not of sound mind? I met his gaze without flinching. No. She was strong. Stronger than both of us put together. And she made her choice freely. I would never dishonor her by pretending otherwise. When my ex-husband took the stand, he tried to cry. His voice cracked, his hands wrung the tissue he had carried in his pocket. I loved her, he insisted. She was my wife even after she left me. I never stopped caring. But under cross-examination, Mr. Carmichael's questions cut through the performance. Sir, when was the last time you lived with your wife? He hesitated. 10 years ago. And when was the last time you paid for her medical bills? Silence. Visited her in the hospital? More silence. The courtroom air grew thick. His mask was slipping and everyone could see it. By the end of the day, I was exhausted, every muscle aching from the strain of holding myself together. But as I walked out of the courtroom head high, I felt something else too, a quiet dignity. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't lied. I had simply told the truth, as my daughter would have wanted. And in that moment I knew whatever the verdict, I had already won. The verdict came on a Thursday morning, cool and damp, with clouds heavy over the courthouse. I remember because I sat by the window before leaving, watching the rain drip from the eaves, steady and patient, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. My hands trembled as I buttoned my coat, but my heart carried a strange calm. I had spoken my truth. Now it was in the hands of the judge. When we entered the courtroom, the air was tense, expectant. My ex-husband sat at his table, his lawyer whispering furiously in his ear. His face was pale, though he tried to look defiant, his jaw tight. I didn't meet his eyes. I couldn't. I fixed my gaze on the judge's bench, steady and unmoving. The judge cleared his throat, his gavel resting lightly against the wood. "This court has considered the evidence presented by both parties," he began. His voice was firm, deliberate, filling every corner of the room. "The plaintiff claims defamation. The defense asserts that the statements made were truthful, supported by documentation, and shared in good faith." My heart pounded like a drum. I clasped my hands in my lap, whispering a silent prayer. "Lord, let the truth be seen." "The evidence," the judge continued, "overwhelmingly supports the defense. Letters, photographs, and legal documents confirm that the defendant's statements were factual and not defamatory. The plaintiff, meanwhile, has failed to provide any credible evidence that he acted as caretaker or spouse during the years in question." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. My granddaughter squeezed my hand, her eyes shining. The judge's voice grew sharper. "Therefore, this court rules in favor of the defendant, Mrs. Bennett. Furthermore, given the malicious intent and the attempt to misuse this court, the plaintiff is ordered to pay damages in the amount of $12,000. The gavel struck once. Final. Absolute. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Relief washed over me so quickly that it left me dizzy. I felt the tears rising, hot and unstoppable. My granddaughter hugged me tightly, whispering, "You did it, Grandma. You won." But across the room, the sight of him pulled at me. My ex-husband sat frozen, his mouth slightly open, his face drained of color. His lawyer gathered papers in silence, avoiding his gaze. And then, as though realizing the eyes of the room were on him, he slammed his hand against the table and stormed out. I watched him go, a storm of anger trailing in his wake. But I didn't feel triumphant. Not really. I felt tired. Tired in my bones, tired in my heart. Victory doesn't erase the ache of what came before. It doesn't bring back the years he stole with his absence, or the daughter I buried. After the courtroom emptied, I stayed behind for a moment, just sitting in the stillness. "Mr. Carmichael patted my shoulder gently. "Justice was served, Mrs. Bennett. You should be proud." I nodded, but my voice was quiet. I didn't want to destroy him. I just wanted the truth. He smiled softly. "And the truth has a way of doing both, protecting the innocent, exposing the guilty." When I stepped out into the rain, it felt different than it had that morning. Lighter somehow, as though the clouds were finally letting go of their burden, just as I had. I tilted my face up and let the drops fall, cool and cleansing. The days that followed revealed the real weight of the verdict. His followers, what few had remained, vanished almost overnight. The news spread quickly. The court had ruled against him, fined him, declared his stories lies. His reputation, once polished on social media, crumbled into dust. Friends who had once stood by him now avoided his calls. Sponsors dropped him. Even his online accounts grew quiet, the comments section filled with disappointment and betrayal. "You lied to us," people wrote. "We believed you and you fooled us." I didn't check often, but my granddaughter sometimes showed me. Not out of malice, but so I would know the truth. His lies no longer had power. At night, I sat by my daughter's photograph and whispered, "We did it, sweetheart. We kept your wishes safe. He can't touch what you left behind." And yet, my heart ached for him in a strange way. Not sympathy. He had made his choices, but sorrow for what bitterness had done. It had eaten him whole, hollowed him out until nothing was left but anger. He had ruined himself with his own hands. I thought back to the man I had once married, the one who used to laugh easily, who danced with me barefoot in the kitchen when we were young. That man was gone long ago, buried beneath pride and resentment. And now the world saw him as he truly was. I carried no joy in that, only a quiet sense of justice. Because the truth had stood. Because my daughter's voice had not been silenced. Because in the end dignity had spoken louder than lies. That night I brewed myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window, the rain still falling softly outside. My house was warm, the lamp casting a golden glow on the walls. For the first time in weeks I felt safe. Safe from his lies, safe from his grasp, safe in the knowledge that the inheritance was protected. Not just the money, but the legacy of a life lived bravely. I whispered one more prayer before bed. Thank you, Lord, for letting the truth shine. And as I closed my eyes, I felt my daughter's presence near, as though she were saying, Mama, you did it. You kept your promise. The weeks after the verdict felt quieter, though not in the way grief does. Grief is heavy silence pressing on your chest, hard to breathe through. This quiet was lighter, like a storm had passed and the air was clearer for it. I could walk through my house without checking my phone every hour to see what lie he had spread next. I could sit at my kitchen table, sip my tea, and feel the kind of peace that comes only when you know the worst of it has been faced. But while my home grew steadier, his world began to crumble. I heard about it in pieces from neighbors, from the news, sometimes even from strangers who wrote me letters. His social media accounts, once so loud, grew eerily still. What few posts he made were bitter rants, but they reached almost no one. The followers who had once cheered him on had left, disgusted. You fooled us, they wrote. We believed your lies, but never again. The man who once basked in attention now shouted into an empty room. His reputation collapsed too. Whatever small jobs and endorsements he had managed online dried up overnight. I heard that a speaking event he had boasted about was cancelled, the organizers embarrassed by his lies. Old friends avoided his calls. Even his own brother, a man I hadn't seen in decades, was quoted saying, "He brought this on himself." One afternoon, my lawyer called to tell me he hadn't even paid the $12,000 fine yet. "He'll have to," Mr. Carmichael said calmly. "The court will see to it." But in his voice I heard the truth. The man had no means left. And yet I felt no triumph. I sat on my porch one evening, watching the sun sink behind the trees, and thought about him. Not the bitter man who had stood in court glaring at me, but the younger man I once loved. The one who used to bring me wildflowers from the roadside, who held our daughter on his shoulders so she could see the fireworks on the 4th of July. That man was long gone, hollowed out by pride and greed. What was left was a shell, a man ruined not by poverty but by his own bitterness. Because bitterness, I realized, destroys faster than hunger ever could. A poor man with hope still has something. But a man who clings to anger, who feeds on lies, that man has nothing, even when his hands are full. I didn't gloat at his ruin. I pitied him. Some evenings I wondered if he sat alone in whatever place he lived now, staring at the walls, wondering how it had all slipped away. Did he think of our daughter? Did he regret the years he lost, the love he squandered? Or was he still too proud, too blinded by anger, to see the truth of his own undoing? I'll never know. But I knew this much. He would not take another piece of her from me. Her memory, her legacy, her love, they were safe now. Protected. And in that safety my own life grew steadier. I tended to the small things again. My garden, my knitting, the quiet joy of baking bread on a rainy afternoon. My granddaughter visited often, her laughter filling the rooms that had felt so empty after the funeral. We'd sit on the porch together, watching the world go by, and sometimes she'd squeeze my hand and say, "Grandma, I'm proud of you." I'd smile, though tears always pricked my eyes, because I wasn't proud. I was simply relieved. Relieved that the fight was done, that I had held my ground, that I had kept my promise to my daughter. The inheritance sat untouched for now, resting in careful accounts, just as she had planned. It wasn't about the money. It was about the future she had entrusted to me, the plans she had made, the dreams she wanted me to carry forward. And I would. But before all that, I allowed myself rest. I allowed myself quiet mornings with coffee and sunlit afternoons with books. I allowed myself to breathe again, without fear of his lies knocking at my door. His life had fallen apart, yes. Mine had grown steadier. But I carried no joy in his downfall. Only a quiet sense of justice. That the truth had stood, that the lies had been defeated. It was a bright morning when I returned to the cemetery, the kind of morning my daughter always loved. The air was cool, the sky washed clean, and the grass glistened with dew. I carried fresh roses, white, the color she always chose for her own garden. My steps were slow, steady until I reached her grave. I knelt down, brushing a few stray leaves from the stone, and laid the roses gently across her name. For a long while I said nothing. Just breathed, listening to the soft rustle of the trees overhead, letting the quiet speak to me. Then, in a voice that trembled at first but grew stronger, I began. Sweetheart, it's done. The truth was heard. The lies didn't win. I promised you I'd protect what you left, and I have. I traced the carved letters of her name with my fingertips. It's safe now. All of it. Every penny, every plan. Not because I wanted it, but because you trusted me with it. And I will honor that trust. Always. I told her about the inheritance, how it remained untouched, waiting for the purpose she had imagined. I told her about the dreams she once described to me late at night. Scholarships for children who had none, shelters for women who needed safety, investments in the future she believed in. I'll see it through, I whispered. I'll carry it out, just as you wanted. The wind stirred then, gentle as a caress, and I felt as though she were answering me. Not in words, but in presence. I stayed a while longer, speaking softly to her as I always did, telling her about the small things, how the roses in the garden were blooming, how her niece had learned to bake her first loaf of bread, how the house felt different now, but not as heavy as before. When at last I rose to leave, I placed my hand firmly on the cool stone. I promise you, darling, I will live in a way that honors your dreams. Not in greed, not in anger, but in love. Your legacy will never be wasted. It will shine. As I walked away, the sun broke through the clouds, warming my back. I lifted my face to it, tears slipping down my cheeks, but they weren't the bitter tears of grief. They were softer now, touched with peace. For I knew in my heart I had kept my promise. And I always would.